So if I take a really long time, you guys won't ask me any questions, right? So I'm going to start by asking you guys a question. How many people publish information on the internet here? A couple? Do you guys publish 10 data sets? Who publishes 10? Nobody? Everybody publishes like 2 data sets, like under 10? Okay, you guys aren't being very interactive. I'll just go on with my presentation. So I'm here to talk a little bit about Geo Network. Now, Geo Network is one of these core OSGeo, so open source geospatial foundation projects. It's been with the foundation for a long time, and I can blame my boss, Yaron, as the founder of the project for its existence. And when I joined GeoCat, I needed to learn what is this program that the company works with. And so this is my slide deck of things I wish I knew when I was first being introduced to Geo Network. So GeoCat is a service provider based in the Netherlands, but you might notice that I don't sound Dutch. I'm actually from Canada. We've got a couple developers in Canada and a few more in Spain. So we're kind of a growing worldwide concern. And the company is based out of an adorable little village called Bennekom in the Netherlands. And you guys can't see that at all on the projector, so just trust me, it's adorable. My name's Jody Garnett. I'm mostly known for working with the OSGeo Foundation on the incubation committee, so welcoming new project teams. I also work with GeoServer, which is very well known, and the GeoTools project. But you might notice something I don't work on, is I'm not a leader in the Geo Network project, but I am an experienced open source developer, so the questions I have about Geo Network might not have been the questions you had. So my questions were like, how do I make it go? What does Geo Network actually do? And who is Geo Network for? Who's the target audience? Who's going to use this? I tried asking you guys how many layers you publish, and based on the response, none of you are interested in Geo Network. But for the people who do use Geo Network, what do they actually use it for? So I also wanted to know a few things. Who makes this? What is the community like? Are these people that I'm going to look forward to interacting with? What kind of quality or maturity does the open source project have? And what is its superpower? What makes it cool? What makes it tick? So my first impressions were looking at the website. And one of the things I really liked to see was in the top right corner, it says OSGeo. And that tells me that it's vendor neutral. When you use an open source project and it's just supported by one company, that's a bit of a risk. What if that company goes out of business? What if that company moves on to another project? So if you see a software project that's managed by a foundation, it's vendor neutral, and that makes it far less risky for you to work with. And then the other thing I saw that's really weird is it actually says open source in the title. Does that mean there's like a commercial version of open source of Geo Network that I have to pay more for? Or is the project so old that open source was a feature? And so we're going to learn that answer over the course of the presentation. And the other thing I asked is, what the heck is going on with this little logo? So, I didn't figure this out, but I'm going to share it with you. So it is a globe, so it's, kind of wrapping around the globe. And then the whole thing is about metadata and so on. And so they've got like a little Zen monk do, something like that. And then if you look sideways, everyone's invited to turn their head sideways for my amusement. You can see that it actually forms the letters G and N for Geo Network. So their logo is really tricky. So trying it out, the installation, like the quick start in the user manual, actually assumes you have Geo Network already installed. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? So before you start, you need to have, it's a Java application, so you need to install Java. It uses Java 8, and then there's various ways you can install it. And then now for Geo Network 4, you also need to have something called Elasticsearch installed. So Geo Network 3 can just run on its own. And Geo Network 4, you need Elasticsearch as like an index engine, and Geo Network 4 works with that. In terms of different things you can download, there is an installer. You can download something called a web archive, if you're using Tomcat or some other Java application server. You're also invited to download the source code and build it yourself. And then there's a Docker image. Does anyone use Docker here? A couple people. That's what I recommend as like the most frustration-free way to try things out. So there's a Java installer, yay. There's a third-party Windows installer, which GeoCat provides. And then there's the official distribution, which you can like download and install into Tomcat. Source code, you can check it out and build it. And then there's the Docker thing. And somewhere that you guys can't read, it's like Docker run, Geo Network, etc. In terms of setup, that's where the actual quick start in the manual begins. Now, normally, if this was my own computer, I would demo Geo Network at this stage, but I'm not going to. We're just going to kind of wing it with slides here. So the quick start tour talks you through signing in. The default username is like admin, which is very creative. And once you've signed in, you can go to this administration console. And this is a really kind of you can see all the configuration options that have been built up over time here. And the place to start is to go to this little section called metadata and templates, and you can actually load some example data. Because when you first started Geo Network, it had nothing in it. Once you've got some data, you can actually try out the next section, which is search. So if I go back to the website for a moment, they talk a lot about finding and getting information and searching for spatial records. Really, this is supposed to be something like Netflix for spatial data. So I work on GeoServer where we publish maps. Nobody cares if they can't find the maps. So the goal is to tell people about the maps by listing them in Geo Network. And then the other thing that's interesting is Geo Network actually provides a map portal, and this wasn't something I was aware of until trying out the project. So now that we've got some data, we can type in some text searches or draw a bounding box and find different data sets that are available. And we can view individual records and see information about them, maybe some samples or thumbnails of what the data set looks like. And And then we've got the option to visualize the data set on a map. So there's a little map viewer using OpenLayers built into Geo Network. And so it's nice. You can browse information, combine data from numerous sources, and see which information you like before you download it. Okay. So you can mix and match content from different places. Okay. So this is the fundamental thing that Geo Network is good for. I'm going to talk about records and standards and all this other kind of stuff, but the important thing is the story is that it's a catalog and it lets people find your information. So Geo Network is a very good catalog. It can manage hundreds and thousands of records. Visitors can go through and search and browse the content. Some of the content is stored in the catalog. Some of it might be documenting external web services like GeoServer that make the data available. Some of the content might be like PDFs that are included in the catalog. And then Geo Network is a map portal that people can use to visualize and try out the information. And so this brings me to like architecture land. Remember, I'm a computer scientist, so if you need to fall asleep for this section, I'll understand why. So if I'm using a desktop client like QGIS, and I want to talk to GeoServer, architecture speak, I'm binding QGIS to the GeoServer endpoint, and I'll be using one of the protocols like Web Map Service or something. What Geo Network provides is the other parts of this triangle. It allows someone to find the information by looking in the catalog, and it also allows GeoServer to publish the information that it has available to the catalog so people can find it. So this is the fundamental building block of all the OGC standards, and so many people miss out by only looking at, a couple legs of the triangle. To get the complete OGC experience, you really need to have every aspect of publish, find, and bind. So this is an example. Technically, the technobabble term for this is that it's a spatial data infrastructure. This represents a complete spatial data infrastructure where I can make the information available and let other people find it. That was a lot of talking. calm before I go to the next section. So if you only make it this far, that's great. You know what Geo Network's for. In the next section, I'm going to talk a bit more about why people really love Geo Network, okay? And what people really love Geo Network for is actually managing all these records that make the information accessible and findable. So it lets you edit and publish the records. It speaks a whole bunch of standards, ISO 19139, something, etc. As a casual user, I don't need to know that. But if I was like a data custodian or archivist, this would mean a lot to me and it would make me happy. And it also supports storing data and documents in the catalog. They have a little thing on their website about system and security. This is really important if you're managing information where you want to make some information available to different groups and have a fine-grained control over what permissions and privileges people can see. Another thing that's fun here is the idea of harvesting from other catalogs. So if I was working at a national level, I might be able to harvest from the individual states or the individual municipalities in my jurisdiction and build up one catalog covering a lot of the information that, that others provide. Yeah, and there's a little bit of analysis so I can see what information is being used. So the question, if I'm a data custodian, is, do I know what data I even manage? And so Geo Network is a tool to help you with that. It helps your team find out what information is available within your organization. You know, maybe you've got directories and directories of like shapefiles and you don't know where they came from. Geo Network can be a tool to help you get a handle of that. It can also help you figure out where data has been copied and track where duplication and so on has occurred. And then another place it helps is if you've got an obligation to share the information with the public. Open data is happy data, but it's only happy if people can find it. So many people have like government directives to make information available, freedom of information or Inspire or other requirements they have to meet. And then this also helps your team know where their map came from. Can they trust the visual they're looking at? Can they see where the information was collected? Can they see why the information was collected? You know, maybe the information was, I don't know, used to track duck migrations and has nothing to do with water use. Okay. So back to the admin console, I can load the metadata samples. I can go through the steps of creating a record, and I'm really sorry you guys can't see this very well. And so this is going through creating a record using one of the templates. So rather than starting from nothing, having something that fills in the blanks. And then we can go through with this metadata editor and provide a name and title and who's responsible for it and their contact information and so on. The other one that I find a bit more rewarding is you can actually use GeoServer to harvest from other things. So I talked a bit earlier about harvesting from other catalogs. I can actually point it at a web service like MapServer or GeoServer, and it will go through and talk to the web service and list all the information that it finds available and create records that will appear in your catalog. And the records might not be very detailed, but there's something. They let your users find stuff. So you can set up a harvest to run once, or you can set up a harvest to run every day or every week. So for many organizations that just want to let people publish data to their GeoServer, you could set up a Geo Network to harvest every day and have better insight into what is going on and what's being used in your organization. So, it comes back, it's harvested something, and the new record appears in GeoServer. Okay, how am I for time? I'm not too bad. So the technical approach, developer-friendly, there's a whole bunch of things about opening all the standards and making it extensible. It is a Java application, so it's it stores some information in a data directory, it stores some information in a database. Nowadays it stores some more information in an Elasticsearch, and it builds up, it has a core where it does a lot of the processing and the heavy lifting, and then they have a user interface where they interact with the core Geo Network. And so as we go through time, we can see for Geo Network 2, they had one user interface. And for Geo Network 3, they kept the core, and they built an entirely new user interface with something called Angular. And I think they're going to be doing that again as new versions of Angular come out. So as a technologist, this is a well-structured application. I can really see evidence of maturity, some investments in the code base, and then I can see those strong architecture boundaries between the core and the user interface. I also see heavy use of XML technologies, and this is the core superpower of Geo Network. So they use something called XML and schematron and so on, but they really take it to extremes. These guys are experts in these tools, and they actually use it on the fly to use XML to generate more XML, and so that editor you see is actually generated on the fly from the XML standard, like from Inspire or from ISO. So that editor isn't hard-coded, it's actually created on the fly. So I lived in Australia for a while. They had ANSLIC, which was a variation on ISO 19139. And we didn't have to change anything in Geo Network. We just loaded it up with our new schema, and that editor matched what the Australian standard was doing. There's some new developments coming out for Geo Network 4. You just missed the State of Geo Network talk an hour earlier, but they're moving to Java 11. The important thing is there's a bunch of organizations that are actively investing in the future of Geo Network, and that's really great to see. Who makes it? Down at the bottom of the page we can see Camp to Camp, GeoCat, and I can never pronounce these guys. You going to help me? What he said. So these are organizations that are actively contributing to Geo Network. Okay, just some examples. My own country of Canada makes use of Geo Network. Hooray. The National Geo Register in the Dutch government makes use of Geo Network. And the United Nations makes use of Geo Network. But notice, this isn't Geo Network open source. This is the original. So Geo Network open source was the United Nations catalog being turned into an open source project. So we've answered our question of why does it say open source in the title, and yeah, that's the answer. So thank you.